All right, looks like we're ready to get started. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining today for our presentation. I'm Ned Relevance, the Director of Cloud Solutions here at Anexinet. Joining me also is Jeff Brownlow, the CIO and VP of Managed Services.
Good morning.
And the topic of today's talk is the evolving data center and skill sets to back it up. And that's a trend that we're seeing from our clients. It's a need to modernize the infrastructure, the applications and analytics, as well as internal processes that support them in order to modernize your enterprise. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let everyone know that there will be a Q&A session following the presentation. So if you could enter any questions into the questions area when you think of them, so don't wait till the end because you might have forgotten the question you had. Go ahead and enter those in, and then we'll address them as time permits after the main body of the presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Keith Townsend, the CTO Advisor, to drop some knowledge on us. Keith, the floor is yours.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ned. So, Ned, thanks for the introduction to Anexinet. I think, unless you wanted to say a couple of words here, we'll get started with some of the material.
Go right ahead.
All right. So, thanks, everyone. Thanks for Anexinet and HPE for sponsoring the CTO Advisor webinar on hybrid IT skills in the data center. Quick introduction on myself. We won't spend much time, but basically I'm the principal owner of the CTO Advisor LLC, media and IT strategy company. You can find most of my content on techrepublic.com, the CTOadvisor.com, and TechTarget. You can also subscribe to the podcast / daily dose, video daily dose that I do, centering around these very topics. All right, our agenda. We're going to do, or hopefully accomplish, three things in a short time that we have this morning, which is to describe the impact of digital transformation. This is a story that I think we've heard over and over again, so it should be at this point a repetitive message, but we'll try to drive it home in hopefully a minute or two. Then we're going to get into the meat of the conversation, which is talking about hybrid cloud versus hybrid IT. This, I think, is a critical point to understand. We see a lot of material from vendors talking about hybrid cloud and how digital transformation requires hybrid cloud, when many of us are struggling with just the concept of hybrid IT and the skills needed to support our existing hybrid IT operations. And then we're going to go into some technology specifics and talk about what skills are needed in the data center, and hopefully point you guys and gals to some resources to help skill up your workforce. So let's talk about digital change and the impact of digital change or digital transformation. I love the saying that change comes slowly until it moves fast. At the height of blockbuster success, Netflix came on the scene. If you look at a lot of the analyst reports at the time, it was all kudos. Blockbuster couldn't do anything wrong. Same store sales were growing. This upstart Netflix came along and basically disrupted the company. On site, this has been repeated time and time and time again. BlackBerry, at the height of its success, Apple came with the iPhone. We can cite now Uber, now something's the Uber of something. Uber, with its digital approach to dealing with its customers, has disrupted entire industries, not just the taxi industry, but transportation in general. We're looking at how to, quote unquote, Uberize freight. As the list goes on and on and on. These pressures reach down into IT. The ability to quickly pivot a business is predicated on the ability of IT to provide the functionality needed for new gen applications. You can't build an Uber-like app on the existing, HPUX, AIX systems that we have in our data center, alongside of what Nutanix the other day called Mode 2 applications, or I've heard Gartner say the same thing, Mode 2 applications. Speaking of Gartner and Mode 2 applications, I love this quote from Doug Lane that basically, with all that said, today is the slowest we'll ever go. Change will happen slowly until it happens fast. And I think we're starting to reach that tipping point where that change is occurring much quicker than we would like to. At the same time, we have this 80-20 rule in our data center. 80% of our resources goes to keeping the lights on. 20% of our resources goes to this digital transformation, transformative work, and it's simply not enough. We have to reskill our existing staff in order to handle this change. But before we even get to the change, what's going on in our data centers today? Let's talk about hybrid X. So, we've heard hybrid a bunch of things, but I'm going to whittle it down to basically two concepts. We have hybrid cloud versus hybrid IT. Hybrid cloud has been this concept that vendors from VMware to Cisco, Nutanix, IBM, the list goes on and on, all the way down to some of the newer players, RightScale, have been selling us, which is, how do we go into a single mode of operations? How do we operate our data center as if it's AWS, Azure, or even Google Compute? We're providing our developers, our end user consumers, a single interface in which they can consume IT resources. They can go to ServiceNow, provision a new Hadoop-based database for a new analytics application platform, and then IT seamlessly provisions the back-end public cloud and private cloud resources needed to consume, needed to provide that Hadoop cluster. Then from an operations perspective, the operations team, all of the NOC and service management components needed to operate that, it's all one single thing. There is no distinction between private cloud, public cloud, or multi-cloud. That's all a single set of operations. That's my definition of hybrid cloud. That is, when we look at the reality of our data centers, we have AS400s in there, we have mainframes, we have HPUX, we have AIX, we have our legacy vSphere, Hyper-V infrastructures, we have multiple network monitoring solutions, we have, hopefully we have a single IT, what previous CIO likes to call the ERP of IT, whether it's ServiceNow or some other service portal. We can have multiple service portals that all want to be the center. Each one of those solutions want to be the center of our data center operations, and none of them are designed for hybrid cloud. That's just the reality of what we're in. There's no single vendor that has a end-to-end solution that will provide this nirvana of hybrid cloud for us. The reality is that most of us, if not all of us, are in the hybrid IT operations. We're dealing with all of that legacy infrastructure, and it's funny to call, vSphere 6, if you're fortunate enough to be on vSphere 6.5 and Windows Server 2016, it's funny to call that stuff legacy. It doesn't feel legacy. It's extremely capable solutions that provide real tangible business results, but that mode of operations is now called legacy. we now have to integrate that, regardless of whether or not we're doing it consciously or out of force. We have to integrate that with cloud services. I haven't run into an organization that isn't consuming some level of cloud resources, whether it's SaaS solutions such as Salesforce.com or ADP for finance, or some other platform as a service that just is a natural course of outsourcing business processes to a third party. IT is left to integrate those components. That next level is infrastructure as a service, where we're, again, forced to support applications that our business users go out and develop, become a critical portion of our business operations, and become mission critical to the organization. I'm sure there's people on the line that went out and had to, at the last minute, support some unknown EC2 instance, especially during this recent outage of S3 that was what became a P1, priority 1 incident on an application you didn't even know existed. This is the reality of our IT environments, and the discussion we're going to get into on what skills are needed to, at the minimum, address this hybrid IT world that we live in. Now, we'll stop here for some questions to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Sure. So I do have a couple questions sitting here. A big question, and I like this one, is how do I go about getting my operations people trained up on these latest skills while still keeping the lights on? So I think that kind of speaks to, half the time operations teams are still trying to put out fires. So how do you get them to learn the latest and greatest skill set while also, keeping the lights on?
So that's a good question, because we're not going to delve specifically into the how-tos of how do you send people. It was kind of the what of, and this is a very, I think, lightning rod topic. Gartner initially, a couple of years ago, had this concept of bimodal IT, where you had data center operations, or not just data center operations, IT operations for the legacy stuff, and then you created a team. You somehow out of your 20% budget, you carved out a team that could go off and learn this new cloud stuff. In reality, that's just not how enterprise IT works. That's not how our budgets work. That's not how our social interactions with team members work. We have to do this concurrently. So I like to take that 80-20 rule and flip it on its side a little bit and say that you're not necessarily carving out 20% of your team. You're carving out 20% of your team's time. So practical things. One, being on this webinar is an easy, free way to start to begin to learn what's out there. The second thing is local events. So if there's not a travel budget, there's VMware mugs, VMware user group conferences that happen regionally that you can send your team to, that basically is just the cost of having someone out the office for the day. Meetups, so we're not just talking about VMware and VMware's approach. AWS, via meetup.com, you can find out local meetups. And then without, not the hawk, Anexinet, I'm sure you guys have local events in which you're helping your customers come up to speed. I think I was originally scheduled to be on site in which I give this presentation. So this is not something that you're going to learn insular. You have to reach out to the community and go out and see what's there. And the best way to do that is still in person, talking to community and what other people in your region are doing.
Great.
Great question.
And I have one more for you. So this person is saying their admins are pretty resistant to the whole cloud discussion because they're worried about losing relevance in the hybrid IT world, and I guess probably worried about losing their jobs, possibly. So how do you go about allaying their fears about the possibility of losing relevance?
I think that's a great question. I love that first slide, and I think you can kind of show that first slide. If I'm sure the Blockbuster store employees were scared of losing relevance and transitioning to a different type of delivery. Seeing Netflix and seeing their friends using Netflix. I mean, IT is a big industry, but it's a small industry. You can't look to your left and to your right outside of your organization and not see change. You either change or you get left behind. This is the great thing about IT is we can look in the past. If you were a mainframe operator and you resisted change with going to client server, the results were pretty obvious. When the people that made the transition well, the benefits were obvious. When you went from the mainframe world to a client server x86 world, you stayed relevant. When you go from a client server x86 world to a hybrid IT cloud world, your skill set and your job stays relevant. The mainframe operator job was different, but just as challenging, if not more challenging, in the client server world. That is the same case in this hybrid IT. Your job changes, but your relevance remains because the whole industry is in the process of change.
Right. So it sounds like the key takeaway there is you have to be willing to make the change.
You have to be willing. I mean, either that or you literally get left behind. I'm having really, as I mentor people, I'm having very tough conversations with them. Basically, with me, it's a little bit more blunt, is do you still want to do IT for a living?
That's pretty blunt. Okay. That's all I have for right now. We can keep moving on.
All right, so let's get into the technology. All right. I saved this slide for itself. I love this picture of an elephant balancing on a log in the cloud, because this is what it feels like as you're discussing data gravity and the new reality of hybrid IT. Regardless of your desire to get to the hybrid cloud nirvana, data is, in my opinion, the number one opportunity and the number one challenge when it comes to hybrid IT, hybrid cloud, and digital transformation. Without knowing the specifics of TensorFlow, FPGAs, GPU-based computing, all the AI and machine learning capability that developers are starting to use in cloud services, as IT professionals, we know a simple fact, which is data has gravity. It is difficult to process, if not impossible, to process terabytes or petabytes of data remotely. If the machine learning capability is in a Google Cloud, if I want to leverage TensorFlow in Google Compute, and I have a petabyte-sized data lake sitting on my on-premises storage array, the physics are simple. That latency between my data center and where the computer's at has to be solved. I can't machine learn at distance. Data has gravity. So either I need to move before we were told that we constantly have to move the compute to the storage because compute is lighter than data. But we're in this world where specialized compute, especially AI and machine learning, has gravity. We can't replicate what Google does with TensorFlow in our data center. Hence, we have to find a way to reduce the impact of data gravity in our data center. That is a discussion upon itself. I just want to set the stage of the problem. Machine learning is just one example. You look at AWS services. AWS has well over 1,000 services that they offer. Any one of those services, probably there's a good chance that it needs the data to be local to the service. So how do you practically move that data from your data center and project it into the cloud and have the security rules when it comes to data governance, HIPAA controls, regulatory controls, your local security controls, etc., on that data set? The number one opportunity and the number one problem. So a lot of the discussion around the skill set is around data access, data gravity, data security. With that in mind, as you're sending people to training, as you're learning about these technologies, until you solve the data problem, which I will tell you, companies big and small, skilled and unskilled, are all struggling with this data access problem, this data gravity problem. How do I get the data closest to the compute while still maintaining the control of the data is a huge problem that the industry doesn't have a end-to-end solution for. So with that, let's get into some practicals in the data center. One of the biggest things when you're talking about hybrid IT is going to be orchestration of resources. This is the stuff that I think is really easy for us to grab our hands around. Whether or not you're dealing with a private data center or a public data center, we have to provision, deprovision, and worry about workload placement. What services am I going to offer? How am I going to provision those services? How am I going to retire those services? And how do I determine where those services run? Some of the technologies in this space where you can, some practicals, where you can send people to either start reading white papers or putting things in the lab, is this concept of composable infrastructure. If you're an HPE customer, you've heard this concept of composable IT or composable infrastructure. HPE has a lot of great material around their Synergy platform. This is not a commercial for HPE. Their competitors offer, I'm independent of HPE, so their competitors offer similar solutions, Dell EMC, Cisco, whatever. The concepts, though, are very solid concepts. Synergy is a good platform to start to consume and understand the concept of composable infrastructure. From an open source perspective, you can look at Redfish, which is kind of this framework of how to do composable infrastructure. Containers are all the rage. However, we know from a basic IT principles perspective, containers are not a end-all, and I think the term is end-all to be all, but basically it's not the nirvana of IT operations. I can't put my Oracle database, well, I can technically put it into an ephemeral container, but that's not a good idea. Getting to know containers in general, Docker is still, while they may financially not be what they thought they would become, Docker is still the center of the container universe. Great starting point to learn. Containers can install it on anything as simple as a laptop, as large as a large data center, bare metal cluster of servers that could parallel your vSphere environment. Kubernetes, a manager of containers. Basically, if I'm sending container requests into your data center, what physical server is it on? You can compare Kubernetes to VMware DRS. There's a workload request. Where's the best place to put that workload? Every major cloud provider has embraced Kubernetes as the container orchestration tool. Very, very, very critical technology when it comes to containers, container orchestration. Packaging that into a simple to deploy, easy to use solution. Docker has a solution that packages Swarm and Kubernetes together. That was recently announced during DockerCon EU. And then Red Hat has this OpenShift, which is a packaged Kubernetes, again, making it easier for your staff to understand and consume and deploy these technologies. Automation is a key feature. I think this time last year, we were mainly talking about automation, how to automate our vSphere cluster, how to automate deployment of instances in AWS, how to automate changing DNS settings, etc. Still pretty important. The focus might be shifting a little bit past automation within the data center and automation within cloud and cloud infrastructures, because I'm seeing that's where most of the wins are at, and especially being able to automate across clouds. So again, some of the technologies that we've already seen in this area are Puppet and Chef. I highly recommend you start looking at cross-cloud platforms that give you the ability to say, okay, I'm going to build a Hadoop cluster. The request from ServiceNow is to build a Hadoop cluster. A decision has to be made from IT perspective based on the characteristics of the request, the SLAs. What's the best cloud to deploy this in? Is it in my vSphere cluster or my Hyper-V cluster, or is it in the public cloud? And if so, in the public cloud, which public cloud? Now, what's the recipe to deploy that service, to boot to select the disk, to select the networking, to provision the OSs, to install the software? Automation platforms or orchestration platforms, blueprint platforms like CloudForms allows that, and to a lesser extent, VMware's vRealize. And then there's the future. And this stuff you can, kind of take with a grain of salt. HPE machine, looking at the data center as a single computer, is super futuristic, but very, I think, akin to how we want to look at multi-cloud and hybrid cloud in general, being able to look at multiple clouds and consume them as one single entity. That's the vision of HPE's machine. That's the vision of HPE's new stack cloud orchestration tool. Super in the future. HPE doesn't even have products in this space yet that they can sell. If you want products that you can buy today for orchestrating the data center as a single machine, that's where a product such as Mesosphere comes in. Mesosphere takes all of the stuff that we see previous to that and says, okay, we're going to treat your 10 Synergy chassis with a total of 120 nodes and 480 cores as a single computer. And whether it's running vSphere, Kubernetes, Docker, etc., we're going to take those requests and orchestrate that across your data center. And to get really fancy, if you want to throw public cloud in that, we'll orchestrate across public cloud. So if you want to see what the bleeding edge of the technology is, Mesosphere is a great point to look at. And I know we're running short on time, so last slide. Data protection. This is low-hanging fruit on the first slide, which is, how do I get to a point where I can move my data to where it needs to be? I love this picture of a tape drive. There's been instances where when you want to transfer data, a large amount of data, the easiest way to do that was via backup. I can back it up to tape, put a bunch of tape in a Pelican case, and ship that Pelican case off to the site that needed a copy of that data set. There's a ton of solutions out on the market, from Rubrik, Cohesity. HPE has with Store Virtual, Druva, the list goes on and on, where they will take your data, your backup process, and switch your backup process to not only include backup, but replication. So how do I project that petabyte of data from my on-premises data center out to the cloud? Look no further than the process we've used for the past 30 years in IT, which is data backup, but data backup virtualized. So from a practical sense, those vendors that I've mentioned before, and then from a more tangible technology perspective, object storage. If you don't have an object storage strategy, get one. Engage your vendors, whether it's Anexinet or any of the vendors that I talked to on this slide. Engage your vendors to learn about object storage and how you can leverage object storage to replicate data from your on-premises data center into the cloud. So then we'll give it over for QA and then the discussion on Anexinet services.
Great, thanks, Keith. Yeah, I got a few additional questions in the hopper. So let's see. The first question is, I'm worried about vendor lock-in when I start implementing the public cloud. What can I do about that? And what do you think about vendor lock-in when it comes to public cloud?
So you're going to get locked in at some level. Let's look at one of the promises from one of the earlier vendors that fought vendor lock-in is RightScale. So RightScale promised to always services that give you a common API between you and your cloud providers. So they could take Azure, AWS, Oracle, AWS, normalize that API, and then provide you a single API into the cloud. So you can move from cloud provider to cloud provider. You can move your application from cloud provider to cloud provider. There's two problems with that. The first problem is fairly obvious. You're locked into RightScale's API. That's a problem. That's not an open source API. Every IT vendor from HPE to Nutanix and the list goes on and on is promising that exact same solution. However, you're going to get locked in at that level. So there's lock-in at no matter the solution, there's lock-in somewhere. The other problem is you can no longer consume you're left to the lowest common denominator across clouds, which is the VM, which is not very transformative. When you look at a service like AWS Lambda, Cloud Functions from Google, and Azure Functions with Microsoft Azure, each one of those services offer very unique capabilities that can be transformative to your business. So while the lock-in of the concern of lock-in is real, understand there's always lock-in at some level. The question you have to balance is does the lock-in bring the business value that you're looking to achieve from your cloud resource?
Great. I have two questions that I think I'm going to smash together because they seem pretty related. The first one is there any value to moving legacy applications to a modern platform like public cloud? And is there an ideal balance between public and private cloud? How do you decide where to put those workloads?
So that's a pretty big question and a tough question. I did a whole podcast on this with the folks from the Packet Pushers. So that if you want a detailed answer, go back on we just call lift and shift to the cloud. So taking what I do in my data center today, doing that in a public cloud, engage a consultant about that. But every time I've done the math from an economics perspective, it's a tough call. It's really tough to make that work at scale. Maybe you have a small data center and all your assets are depreciated or not all your assets are depreciated, so you won't be paying for IT twice. The assets that's still on your books and the OpEx costs associated with running those same workloads in the cloud. Then operationally, remember you're putting applications that were built and designed to run inside of your data center into an abstracted data center where you no longer have access to, okay, how many drives are in this server? What's the CPU, what's the real CPU load on the server itself. You lose all that visibility into the hypervisor, and you still have to support troubleshooting performance of an application that was built to run in your data center. So unless you have a real plan for taking that application and migrating it to a platform that can consume cloud services natively, my personal opinion is that it's a very hard sell from an operations perspective and from a cost perspective to get any real advantage. Now, if your IT is just simply broke, you're having problems keeping services, your infrastructure up, and you're just not good at infrastructure, paying someone more money to be better at infrastructure is not a bad deal. So this is not, a zero-sum game. It's not a yes or no answer. It is the typical, I'm from PwC. My background is I'm a consultant, so I'm going to give the consultant answer. It depends.
Oh, that's my favorite answer. It's the one I always give. Yeah, we're running a little tight on time, so one final question. I think that's pretty relevant, and you dove into a little bit. Is running your own data center? You have pretty predictable costs, but the cloud seems like the costs could spiral out of control. I like that, spiral out of control. So how does someone keep the costs in check when it comes to cloud spend?
Yeah, so there's tools available to you. There's Turbonomics provides tools. Cloud Genera is really great for predicting what your cloud cost is or comparing what your cloud costs are to your private data center costs. There's the good old-fashioned brute force of having someone for spreadsheets and taking data from your existing environment and running that across that. But basically, this is an area that tooling helps. Now, tooling is just one part of it. The obvious challenge, or not so obvious challenge, is governance, which is controlling who has the ability to spin up and spin down new instances or new services. This is a really tough balance because you want to give your end users the ability to control and spin up and down provisioning of resources. However, with that comes the unknown of cost. So tools such as Turbonomics or Cloud Genera that integrate into your service management solution that access control to the cloud is a great challenge. And all of that is caveated with the fact that if you go into the cloud because it's elastic, and you design it to meet you deploy it to application to auto scale and meet demand, then you're at the mercy of your demand. If your demand, especially for a non-revenue generating app, if you kind of turn the knob to open and allow your solution to scale as needed for performance, then you're kind of at that unpredictable workload instance, and you have to look at the tools of your actual cloud provider. You can't really abstract that away.
All right, it sounds like it's a challenge, and some tools will help you, but you also need the governance and analysis behind it as well. Great. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Brownlow to talk a little bit about managed services and how that sort of fits into the cloud and hybrid IT discussion.
Great, thank you. And Keith, thank you very much. As Ned mentioned earlier, I wear a couple hats for Anexinet, one of which is the CIO, the other being managed services. And a lot of what Keith said today resonated, particularly as Anexinet, as a firm trying to solve some IT challenges. We are increasingly investing a lot of energy and capital dollars into some of our platforms, both cloud services and platform as a service bundles. So we're spending a lot of time with that integration. So the data absolutely is something that we deal with on a daily basis. So I can appreciate that. So Anexinet really can help firms through a lot of the transformative journey, through envisioning, through transformation. And managed services can help firms during this process as well as after the process has been completed when you get into that run state. So one of the things that Keith noted, he noted the 80-20 rule, and that particularly stood out for me. So as companies are going through that, oh, I got to transform, I've got folks that are either clamoring to do the new stuff or they're unable to get to the new stuff because their current workload is just too much. So this is an area that Anexinet managed services can certainly help. Right? We can basically free up folks to either get trained and to focus on strategic transformative initiatives by being able to provide some support of and maintenance of the existing legacy applications and infrastructure. The one thing I think that Anexinet does very well is we do a multitude of skills, whether it's in the digital application space, analytics, or hybrid IT. And we can bring all of that to bear for generally less than a cost of an FTE. That really kind of enables a lot of folks to kind of begin their journey along this transformative path.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, if people want to know more, they're certainly welcome to visit the Anexinet website, anexinet.com. Didn't make it funky or anything. And that's going to conclude our webinar. I want to say a special thank you to Keith Townsend for being on the line and giving what was, I think, a fantastic and very informative presentation. So thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jeff, for talking about our managed services a little bit. And thank you to everyone on the line for attending today. I certainly appreciate it. If you want more information about Anexinet, you can go to the website. If you want to know more about Keith and what he's up to, I think he had the contact stuff on there, and we'll have a follow-up with his information. Or you can always just search CTO Advisor, right?
Exactly. That's the easiest way. Yes, CTO Advisor on Twitter.
All right, great. So thank you once again, everybody, for attending, and have a great rest of the day.